Today, one of the biggest, fastest growing groups experiencing homelessness isn't young adults, it's people over 50, representing over half of the current homeless population, and it is growing exponentially. So we have more and more older adults, people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and on up, people who have worked, contributed to society, raised families, paid taxes, followed the rules, are now losing their homes. And for these people, there is usually a moment in their lives when things change. Sometimes it might be loud, but most often it's quiet. They receive a letter in the mail, a bill that's a little higher than last month, a job that suddenly isn't secure. Or maybe they got laid off, their rent's rising, a doctor's appointment that confirms what they were hoping wasn't true. That moment is so ordinary, but they don't realize that it's the beginning of something bigger. And if you look around, not with judgment in your own community, but with attention, you're going to start noticing these signs. We see them, but we don't really see them. We look, but we don't ask. Maybe because it feels uncomfortable to us, maybe because we don't know what to say, or maybe, if most of us are being honest, because some part of us hopes their story will never be ours. But what if the distance between their life and our life isn't as wide as we think? And speaking of this, on this episode, we will not be discussing blame. This isn't about politics and it isn't about reducing people to statistics or stereotypes. It's about listening, really listening to the stories we're trained not to look at too closely, the stories that are unfolding quietly all around us. So, wherever you are right now, in your car, on a walk, cleaning your kitchen, or sitting alone in a quiet room, take a breath and just be here. Because the story we're about to walk into isn't just about homelessness, it's about aging, about being human, and about everything we assume will protect us until the day that it doesn't. We like to think we understand aging. We imagine, most of us imagine it as slow mornings, maybe some warm coffee, tea, time finally belonging to us and not the morning rush traffic, however you commute to work. The reward that we have received after decades of working, caring, giving, surviving, but right now in America, something unexpected is happening. As I mentioned, there is a shift that's happening, and it's the kind that most of us just can't see, don't want to see, or look away from. We understand that over half of the homeless population in the United States is not young people, it is older people. And maybe hearing that, your first reaction may be disbelief, or maybe you're confused, or perhaps if you've been watching the world closely, it doesn't feel surprising at all. But here's the part that's harder to hear. Most of the older adults losing housing right now never thought it would happen to them. I mean, I don't think it would happen to me. Do you think it would happen to you? They thought they were prepared. I think I'm prepared. They believe they've done everything right. They trusted the math of hard work, which should equal stability. But somewhere along the way, the math stopped adding up. And this is where our story begins. Homelessness doesn't usually start with some sort of catastrophe, at least not for older adults. It usually starts quietly. They will get a bill in the mail, maybe a higher bill than they got last month. Then another bill arrives, maybe a letter that tells them the rent is going to increase, a tax increase, maybe a medication cost increase, the rent notification that I mentioned. And in the beginning, there's always some sort of confidence. And I think most of us can relate to that. When something like that happens, I'll figure it out. I've been through worse. This is temporary. But take Sandra. For most of her life, she was someone people could count on. She had children, she raised her children, she worked, she paid her bills, she paid her taxes, she did all the things that were supposed to guarantee her stability in her older years. But when she turned 60, something changed. It was subtle at first. She lost her job and she got laid off. And she noticed that employers started seeing her, stopped seeing her experience actually, and started seeing her age. Because when she got laid off, she did what all of us would do, right? In this situation, and she started applying for new jobs. Most of her applications went unanswered. And when she did land an interview, it usually ended really quickly, and feedback that she got was really vague, almost coded. And so the confidence that she had had most of her life began to thin. And then there's Ron. His life actually changed with a phone call that none of us are really prepared for. His wife, his partner in every version of every future he had ever imagined, was suddenly gone. And grief is not just sadness. Grief is disorientation. Grief can look like this: forgetting to eat, forgetting to open your mail, forgetting to really understand how to move through the world because the world feels foreign to you all of the sudden. And when life becomes something that you're enduring instead of living, even routine tasks that you've done for years can crumble around you. And for both of them, there wasn't one moment where everything actually fell apart. There were dozens, small ones, forgettable ones. And then one day they realized the life they had was slipping out from underneath them. Not because they stopped trying, but because the world around them changed. I know what some of you are thinking right now. Yes, that's sad, but still they should have planned better. They knew this was a possibility. To that I say this. No one wakes up one morning and says, "Today I become homeless." It happens in small increments, in delayed decisions, in exhausted choices, in the quiet spaces. When you have things like this happen where shame grows louder than the options, this is something that is often ignored when we discuss how seniors end up on the street. Let's take a look at Sandra's story, because for Sandra, the shift looked ordinary and would look ordinary to anyone from the outside. When things started to change for her in terms of her income, she had less than she had had before. She decided to downsize. She decided to cut expenses, stop buying fresh food. She would ration her medications. And eventually, one day, her bank account balance hit zero. And she was doing everything that she could, right? She sat with that number for a really long time because for her, it wasn't just about a bank balance. It was the measure of everything she thought she had built over the years. And this was not so different from what Ron experienced. His drift was internal. Grief turned into depression. Depression then would turn into isolation. And when the eviction notice finally came, Ron didn't get upset. He didn't even feel sorry for himself or even worry about what would happen next. He just folded up quietly as if he had been expecting it. This is what depression does, brought on by grief. And for both of them and for thousands of others, homelessness didn't feel like failure. It just felt like an inevitability, like it was going to happen no matter what. The realization that this is going to happen, not this can happen. And sometimes it happens slowly enough that you don't even notice until it's already there. There is a truth. in what I'm about to say. When we hear a single story, it's easy to believe it's just that, a story, even two stories. Something singular, maybe two, it's rare, something unusual. But when the same story begins repeating in different cities, different states, different households, I think that we can conclude that this is no longer a coincidence. This is a pattern, and patterns tell us something about the world that we're living in. Over the past decade, for example, the cost of housing in the United States has risen faster than wages. I think we can all agree on that. In some areas, it's actually 3 to 4 times faster. Rent increases that used to happen every few years now seem to arrive annually, sometimes twice in a single year. And when you're living on a fixed income or the remains of some sort of retirement savings, there is no adjusting to that. It's not a matter of budgeting, cutting back. It's just a matter of math. And the math no longer works. Do you remember a time when it was expected? I don't know if you do, but actually understood maybe that you would work and, do all your responsibilities, work, pay taxes. Maybe you wanted to raise a family, and then you would retire, perhaps maybe to Florida. Well, there's been a retirement shift. And I will say this, that is not saying there was an expectation that retirement to Florida would be luxurious or even extravagant, just earned. It's just a stage of your life where work slowed, you had easy mornings, rest increased, maybe you traveled, and survival wasn't a calculation, it was just a given. But for millions of older adults today, retirement isn't a chapter. It's not even really expected. It seems more like a myth. There was a mother. There was a story that I read of a mother who, just like I said, did everything she was supposed to do, worked for years and saved and saved and saved, and felt like she had had enough saved. She worked beyond the normal retirement age. She retired, and a day later, guess what happened? She passed. This is not even where we're headed, because I have heard so many stories like that happen. It happened to my uncle. This is where we are, working because there's no alternative. And some of us are just working and working and working well beyond retirement because cost of living is rising and rising and rising. And we want the security that we're not going to end up on the streets. But now we're working ourselves to death because there's no alternative. If you walk into grocery stores, maybe hardware stores, coffee shops, all kinds of places, you're going to notice something in your community. I challenge you to go out there and see it now. There are seniors everywhere working. Yes, some of them want to, but most of them do not. So if you don't believe me, I challenge anyone listening to this right now to go out into your community and look around. I mean, really look. You will see lots of seniors out in the community working. They're bagging groceries, they're wiping down cafe tables, they're taking your order. They're baristas, they're pushing carts in parking lots in the heat and the cold. They're greeting customers with tired smiles that hold more history than most of us even realize. And there is a heartbreaking truth in this. Most of them are not working, like I said, because they want some sort of extra income. Some may be, most are not. The statistics don't lie. They're working because without that paycheck, they don't eat, they don't get their medication. And I want to tell you about a story right now that I think is appropriate at this point, about an 83-year-old man. It went viral. You may already know about this story, but he was working at a store. I can't remember the name of the store. And he had been working there for quite some time, 83 years old, not as fast as he used to be, but people noticed it. And they began to wonder why he was working there. He wasn't working there because he wanted to. He had to, so he could eat, so he could have a place to live. He had been married for years, and him and his wife prepared for retirement. They did everything they were supposed to, and then she got sick, and all the money they had saved was spent for her treatment until she passed away, and he had no other choice. Thankfully for him, his story, it had a happy ending in the sense that there were people around him that noticed him and were able to raise, I think it was over $1 million, to provide him with the stability that he needed so he could retire and live the rest of his years without having to worry about eating and a roof over his head. And it's not just about eating. Many of you are probably still discussing the recent government shutdown the country endured and the possibility of another. But at the heart of contention, one of the main reasons there was no consensus on budget to open the government was healthcare rather subsidies. And just stay with me. This is important because we're going to talk about why it's important. Because as we age, and how this relates to homelessness. As we age, we usually find ourselves with some sort of medical debt, right? Our bodies are just not holding up as well. One diagnosis, one surgery, maybe you have an unexpected hospital stay or two. And then decades of that financial stability that you've saved and saved and saved can just evaporate overnight. And when you've got healthcare cost rising and rising and rising, then you're gonna get into some trouble. When you're younger, you could take on another job, right? If you had an unexpected hospital stay or you got sick, you have the energy to do that. You can work longer hours, you have the time, and you can pay off the debt. But this is not the case when you get on up in years, as they say. Many older adults are forced then to choose between things like medication or groceries, rent or treatment, heat or insulin, survival today or stability tomorrow. And choices like that are not choices at all. This is what aging without a safety net looks like. And for generations, as I mentioned, there was this expectation. Some of you may remember that, where we believed that certain things were guaranteed. Social Security that you pay into would be enough for you. You wouldn't have to worry about not having a roof over your head, and you'd have health care. But unfortunately, that's not the case. You believe that Medicare would cover medical needs. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen the news on that. That's not the case. Retirement savings would stretch, perhaps, depending on how much you have in there. The cost of living has risen so high so quickly. Even that is not guaranteed. Families would be nearby, perhaps. Nope. Most families disperse themselves across different states. Some straight across the country from their older parents, grandparents, etc. And you also maybe expected your community would step in. Most communities are taxed, stretched thin. But so, with those expectations, what happens then when, like I mentioned, none of those things are true anymore? And I wish this was just a dramatic statement that I'm making, but it's not. Take a look around at what's going on. I mean, really happening around you in your community, perhaps in your own family. And speaking of this, if you're lucky enough to have a family around, this could absolutely be the difference between a safe place to sleep at night, a meal in your belly, and sleeping under a bridge in the middle of the winter. Along with this reality comes another thing that I like to call the loneliness factor. This is another layer that's really harder to measure, such as the numbers they give you for homelessness or the numbers for the rising cost of healthcare, but it's just as real. This directly addresses the questions, this loneliness factor you might have about where are the families of these seniors. I've gotten a lot of questions, a lot of comments from the episode that I did on homelessness, where I profiled several different stories. And how can these families let this happen? Well, it turns out that many older adults today live alone. Those are the statistics. Adult children have grown up and they've moved away. usually hours, if not days, or maybe they don't have any children at all. Their friends have aged, they've become sick, maybe they've passed away, maybe their partner passed away. And when there's no one around, then to notice those small moments that we mentioned earlier and notice the struggle, then there's no one there to help catch the fall. And I will tell you that the statistics are clear on this one. Most of our seniors will not reach out for help. By the way, they are ashamed of their circumstances, and pride and dignity prevent them from asking for help. And then when you add in stigma, well, it's very unlikely that they ever will. And you might be quick to blame the family at this point for not doing a better job of checking in. But before you do that, I think we need to discuss the cultural blind spot that exists in our society today. As a society, we've become good at moving fast. We scroll on our phones, we consume information, we produce, we react. But somewhere in all of that speed, we stop looking. We stop paying attention to things that we view as not our own, things that don't immediately impact our day to day lives. And so I think an example of this, and it's not because we're unkind, but I'm going to get into that. But somewhere in all of that speed, we stopped looking. We stopped paying attention to things that we view as not our own, things that don't immediately impact our day to day lives. And it's not because we're unkind, but it's because the world is demanding so much attention from us that we sometimes forget to notice the things, in this case, who is slipping through the cracks. And so, as more and more older adults struggle quietly, privately, the world keeps going, moving all around them. And so we see the rent increases, the medical bills arrive, the job rejections repeat over and over. And then that stability that was once expected, worked for even, becomes extremely fragile. And this is the point in the story where the distance begins to shrink between us and that outcome. Because once we see the pattern, once we understand the forces behind it, the question then is no longer, well, how did this happen to them? The question then inevitably becomes, what does this say about the world that we're aging into? Think about it. It's easy to listen to stories like Sandra's or Ron's and then place them somewhere else, somewhere far away from your own reality. I mean, it's a different life. They have a different set of choices, a different path, because that distance feels safe. But within that safety, there is a subtle truth. And sometimes without realizing it, the stories we distance ourselves from are the stories that are closest to us. Maybe not now, maybe not tomorrow, next year, but think about this. How many times have you made your own small observation? So, what I mean is when you walk into a grocery store and you see a 70-year-old plus working the register, when you see someone perhaps who looks just like your grandma pushing shopping carts in the rain and it's cold, do you ever look at that? Do you ever wonder, is this what they planned for their final decades? Or do you tell yourself this? They like staying busy. They probably just enjoy working and they're probably bored at home. This thought process that most people have, it's not a cruel thought process. It's just self-protecting, because the alternative, the possibility that they're there because they have to be, that is heavier for the heart to be able to hold. And you may not know it, but that thought process is part of a quiet agreement that society has made. At some point, without announcing it, society shifted from caring for its elders to expecting them to keep themselves afloat. So, I mean, we can see that in the rise in the retirement age. We need them to work longer. We also need you to spend less, learn how to budget. We need you to age quietly. Don't need too much. Don't cost too much. Don't get sick. Don't fall behind. And many people internalize those rules without ever meaning to. So for me, a question sort of quietly slips in then. And I guess this is a thought, not a challenge, not a demand, just a sort of a question to sit with. When you picture your own aging, do you imagine rest or resilience? Because those aren't the same. Rest says, I've done enough. Resilience says, I still have to survive. And honestly, I think this brings us right to the circumstances we rarely say out loud. We often talk about what younger generations face, and let me tell you, that conversation matters. But there is another reality happening quietly at the same time. A generation that spent decades building the world that we live in, building, contributing to society, being part of that, is now aging into uncertainty. And whether we acknowledge it or not, it affects all of us because aging isn't just personal, it's cultural. It tells us who we value, who we want to protect, who deserves safety, and who silently is expected to figure it out alone. Maybe then the real question isn't why are so many seniors becoming homeless, like we started with at the top of the episode. Maybe the question is did when did we become comfortable with the idea that some people age without dignity? And if that question feels heavy, that's okay. If you're feeling something right now, whether it's sadness, discomfort, anger, you disagree with me, confusion, then that means you're still paying attention. And I hope this episode doesn't feel like a news headline or a statistic or someone else's problem, because the truth is, none of us know what aging will look like for us. We like to believe we'll be always be steady on our feet, prepared, that our health will hold out, our relationships will last, our finances will go according to plan, because believing that gives us a sense of control. But aging isn't linear. It can change with a diagnosis, with the loss of a spouse, maybe, with a job market that says clearly but politely, we don't have space for you anymore, which we can clearly see. And that doesn't just change income, it changes identity. And really, I think this goes back to what I said earlier on, the harder truth, the one we don't say out loud. We don't look away because we don't care when we see this. We look away because some part of us wonders, could this happen to me? And I think awareness is the turning point. The moment we stop seeing them and start seeing us, that's a line I think that can change perspective. And when we finally see that, we stop asking what they did wrong, and then we start asking what went wrong around them. And that shift, the beginning of that turning point, if you will, that quiet internal shift is where change begins. So it's not like the soft pity you may have of distance, but the kind that says your story matters and you deserved better. Because when a crisis becomes this large, this persistent, it's easy to imagine no one is doing anything about it. But guess what? You know what the dominant thought usually is? Someone else is taking care of it. That's this little thing called diffusion of responsibility. And the truth is, there are people working every single day, social workers, case managers, shelter staff, nurses, outreach volunteers, and so on, people who show up and do their best to help the situation. There are people like me who try to put this information out. And many of these people go above and beyond. They buy blankets with their own money. They sit with someone through panic. They find medication samples for people who can't afford medication. They call housing offices again and again because the wait list hasn't moved in months. And yes, this is a great thing, but the system they're fighting against, this is the harsh reality. The people that they are trying to help to change their situation, their help exists inside a structure that doesn't match the scale of the problem, because we know that there are few two beds. We know that there are few two programs. We don't have enough long term support options. There are a lot of barriers, a lot of eligibility rules, and many cracks where people disappear. There is, in fact, one caseworker story that really stays with me that I want to share with you. Essentially, what she said was, I'm not choosing who gets help and who doesn't. The system makes that choice. I just have to tell people where they landed. Sit with that for a minute. She's just telling people where they landed in the system. And some seniors will wait for months for services, some years, and some just simply don't make it to the moment where their name rises to the top of the list. And while they wait, some will continue to seek shelters. And yes, it's something, but shelters, especially for older adults, aren't designed for long-term aging. They're crowded, unfortunately, which speaks to the problem. They're very loud, they're shared, they're often unsafe for mobility, medication management, memory issues, disability. They're just a bandage that's placed over a wound that is actually requires surgery. They're necessary, and sometimes they can be life-saving, but never the cure. It's definitely a good intention though. But good intentions aren't the same as infrastructure. And across the country, there are programs trying to change the situation. You got housing first pilots happening, medical respite centers, mobile health clinics, trauma informed care models, just to mention a few of them. But the truth is, they're being built after the need became overwhelming. And unfortunately, they're scaling slower than the crisis is growing. So, where does this leave us? So, we stand in this uncomfortable space, a place where compassion exists, but capacity doesn't. And where I just told you, professionals, there are people who care deeply, but the policies are lagging behind the reality of what's happening. And we know help is being offered, but not enough to reach everyone who needs it. So, this isn't a story then about a lack of empathy. It's a story about systems that weren't built for the world that's currently happening. Systems that were built decades ago based on the assumptions, the expectations that I talked about earlier that no longer hold true. So it's cracking under the weight of growing need. And if you're still with me, if you're still listening, then you've crossed an invisible line. And that line is between that's sad and this means something. And while this episode isn't ending with an answer, I wish that it was. It will lead to one more conversation because there are countries, places not different, so different from our own, where aging and homelessness aren't intertwined. These are countries where systems are built around dignity, prevention, and care, not a crisis response. So seniors don't fall into the margins because they don't have margins. And I want to talk about those places, not to compare, not to shame, but to ask if solutions already exist, why aren't we using them? Because this story isn't finished. The story of senior homelessness in America isn't a closed chapter, it's still being written. It's being written in shelters, in parking lots, on waiting lists, in doctors' offices where someone is whispering, I don't know how I'm going to pay for this. It's happening quietly for the most part, sometimes invisible, until we can no longer hide it. It's busting at the seams. And if there's one thing we can take from this episode, one small shift, maybe it's this. There These are not stories of failures. These are stories of society outgrowing the systems meant to sustain it. In the next episode, we're going to step outside the borders of this narrative, and we're going to explore places where aging doesn't mean instability, where homelessness among seniors is actually rare, not rising, and where the protections exist before the crisis, not after it. So we're going to find dignity here. And it's something that perhaps we can look in the future to model. So, but for now, we end here, not with an answer, but with a question you may find returning long after this episode ends. What kind of society are we becoming? And what kind do we want to be? Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying. And thank you most of all for being willing to sit with the stories most people look away from. If you haven't already, don't forget to follow the podcast. You can find it where you get all your favorite podcasts. Until next time, take care of your mind, body, and soul.